Tolkien, we should remember, was very nearly a member of the underclass. He was miserably poor. It was only the chance of having King Edward's Birmingham open to him which got Tolkien a first-class education. Well, my name's Tom Shippey, and I've been interested in Tolkien for many years now, starting off with writing about him, meeting him, because we both went to King Edward's Birmingham. I followed Tolkien to Oxford, which is where I met him, but after that I also inherited his chair of English language and medieval English literature at the University of Leeds. His employer was Henry Bradley. Now, Henry Bradley, like Tolkien's other tutor, J.R.R, was a man who never had a university degree. Philology was the most democratic discipline in the world. Bradley actually was working as a correspondence clerk in a Sheffield steel factory. J.R.R worked in a Yorkshire cotton mill. All these men were autodidacts, and they were also linguistic freaks who picked up languages like nobody's business. Arabic, Persian, Sanskrit, whatever. Well, of course, these people didn't always fit in terribly well to Oxford society. You know, they had Yorkshire accents, oh dear, and they didn't have degrees, and some of their habits may well have been a bit uncouth. But so what if you know more than anybody else in the world? Tolkien, he's been hated by the entire literary establishment. I could not care less, because I was never a professor of English literature, a poor, squalid, shabby bunch in my opinion. I was a professor of English language. When I was a lad, what we were told all the time was that there was a great tradition of the English novel. Jane Austen, George Eliot, Henry James, D.H. Lawrence, some other people as well, I dare say. But so much of the great tradition that I was taught is really fussing about the Anglo-American class system. Genteel adultery in East Massachusetts, minor spats among people in North London and North Oxford, people who were actually nothing like as interesting as they thought they were. Well, I would say that actually I quite agree with the notion that great novelists should address great issues. But what were the great issues? What was really important to even to the haute bourgeoisie over most of Europe was being bombed and suffering ethnic cleansing and suffering genocide and wondering what was the meaning of all this. And it seems to me that that is what the authors of works like 1984 or Slaughterhouse-Five, or Lord of the Rings, that's what they were writing about. And the reason people took to them is because people recognized that. And so I wrote the book, which is called Tolkien, Author of the Century. And I knew they'd hate it. Oh, and they did. Indeed, I remember another distinguished professor of literature shouting down the phone, not to me, but to another interviewer, Author of the Century? Has the fella never heard of Proust? I thought, yes, the fella has heard of Proust, actually. Shall we conduct the rest of this interview in French? I bet mine's much better than yours, you monoglot clown.
3, take 1.
Coming back to what?
Coming back from the war.
Oh, yes. I was invalided at that part of my time of the war, and I think the last things I can remember...
Tolkien, of course, went over the top with the Lancashire Fusiliers. It was very hard, I think, to have a notion of heroism after the profoundly cynical experience of World War I, of industrialized warfare. And you might say, in fact, that it was impossible to write heroic literature anymore. As Robert Graves said, goodbye to all that. It's gone. We've had it. What Tolkien did was to create a new image of heroism and actually to make it compatible with what people knew from their own experience. So Tolkien actually turned the tide, the ironic tide, and he made it possible not only to write fantasy, but to write heroic fantasy. And perhaps the critical invention there is hobbits. That's a new kind of heroism. The real theme of Lord of the Rings is loss. Behind that, though, I think, there is a kind of tension and a sense of wanting to reach back to something which is gone. And at the same time, there's a very strong attachment to the here and now. I think this comes out in what I call the myth of stars and trees. We and the hobbits and the elves are all in Middle-earth, trapped in a forest. We love the forest, but we're kind of stuck in it. And in a forest, you lose your bearings. You don't know where you are. But you look up through the trees and you see the stars. And actually, they're kind of reaching out to the stars, but reluctant to leave the trees. And that gives the whole of Tolkien's work a kind of sense of loss and grief, but also of hope and ambition.